Welcome to Storytime Fun, boys and girls. We hope you enjoy. Today's story is out of the Walt Disney Storyland book. And today's story is called Through the Picture Frame, adapted from the Hans Christian Andersen story, Ole Lukui. It was Hjalmar's bedtime. He gathered up all his toys and put them neatly away in the cupboard. Then he yawned, so sleepily, and hopped into bed. Hardly had he closed his eyes when the window was pushed slowly open with a funny little old man with long white whiskers and spindly legs came into the room. He carried an enormous umbrella. He tiptoed over to Hjalmar's bed and peered at him over the edge of the covers. He muttered. Everything's in order. He's asleep on time, and his room's neat and tidy. Hjalmar opened one eye. Who are you? He said wonderingly. I'm Ole Lukui. The little old man answered in a small, rusty voice. Get ready if you want to go. Hjalmar was wide awake now. He began to understand Ole had come to take him on an adventure. Where are we going? He cried excitedly. Ole Lukui looked around the room. On the wall, in a gilt frame, was a picture of tall trees and a winding river that ran through the green meadows. That will do, said the little old man. Then he flipped open his umbrella and held the handle towards Hjalmar. Hang on, he cried. No sooner had Hjalmar gripped the handle than he found himself being whisked across the room through the frame and into the middle of the picture. He was standing in the meadow. A warm breeze rustled the top of the tall trees, and a little red boat with silver sails bobbed up and down at the water's edge. As Hjalmar stepped into the boat, it glided noiselessly away over the smooth water. Gaily colored birds flew above him. They were flapping their wings so close to him that the breeze helped fill the sails, and the boat sped along even faster. Hjalmar looked down into the water. There were hundreds of fishes with scales of silver and gold swimming after him. They were the most beautiful fishes he had ever seen. They would leap right out of the water, turn a fancy somersault, and then dive back in again. They seemed to enjoy it. When Hjalmar was watching all these wonderful things, a mermaid came shimmering to the surface and clung to the side of the boat. She swished her tails gracefully and smiled up at him. In her hand, she had a garland of seaweed. She reached over and dropped it around Hjalmar's neck. Hjalmar blushed. He tried to thank her, but somehow the words just wouldn't come out. Other mermaids were swimming around the boat now. One of them sang a soft note, and suddenly the air was filled with music so sweet that the nightingales in the far-off woods stopped to listen. Past mossy banks speckled with the primroses and violets, under the shady boughs of drooping willows, then out into the open again, and over a gleaming waterfall sailed the little boat. There were tiny islands dotted about, glowing with brilliantly colored flowers. Here and there, tall castles rose up and reflecting their beauty in the water. They were made of glass and burnished gold. Just as Hjalmar passed under a golden bridge, he noticed a lonely gray tower standing at the water's edge. I wonder who lives there, he thought. If you're really interested, I could tell you, whispered a small voice behind him. Hjalmar looked around and saw a funny little green and yellow frog sitting in the stern of the boat. But it wouldn't do you any good to know, the frog went on. And it wouldn't do me any good to tell you either, because if the Black Horseman found out that I had given away his secret, he would turn me into a stone. With that, he let out a frightened croak and hopped back in the water and disappeared. Now, locked up in a room in the top of the tower was a beautiful princess. Her only companion was a snow-white pigeon. Day after day, the princess sat weeping and waiting for someone to rescue her from the Black Horseman who had held her captive. She looked through the bars of her little window and saw Hjalmar. He was gazing up in her direction. The princess hastily scribbled a note and gave it to the pigeon. Deliver this to him at once, she whispered hopefully. He may be the prince who has come to save me. In a twinkling, the snow-white pigeon was winged its way down toward Hjalmar, far below. It dropped the message at his feet. Hjalmar picked it up and read it. A princess in distress, he exclaimed. I must go to rescue her. It won't be all that easy, said the pigeon, who had perched itself behind him. As a matter of fact, it's against all the rules for anyone but a real prince to rescue a princess. What does it matter who rescues her? Said Hjalmar. A maiden in distress is a maiden in distress. Well, now that you put it like that, said the pigeon, I'm inclined to agree with you. If you are really quite sure you want to go on this adventure, I think I can manage the details. Of course I'm sure, answered Hjalmar bravely. Then the snow-white pigeon muttered some magic words, and Hjalmar was suddenly surprised to see that he was dressed like a prince. A sword hung from his waist. Before he could say a word, he found himself mounted on a noble horse, charging full tilt toward the tower. Straight through the heavy wall plunged horse and rider. Hjalmar shut down his eyes as massive stones came tumbling down all around him. Yikes! It was dark inside the tower, but Hjalmar wasn't a bit afraid. He rode in and out of the big hall, searching for the staircase that led up to the princess's prison room. The clatter of his horse's hooves in the marble floors echoed like claps of thunder throughout the tower. There must be some way to get to the top of the tower, thought Hjalmar. At one end of the long hall, hung with ornaments made of spun gold, Hjalmar came to a door. It was studded with precious gems, so dazzling that he could hardly bear to look at it. The door was as high as the ceiling and as thick as the heavy stones on which it was hinged. Hjalmar dismounted, drew his trusty sword, and struck at the door with all of his might. Immediately it flew open. The The sparkling jewels changed into bluebirds, and they flew happily around Halmar's head, whoa, singing songs of the forest. I must have broken the spell that held them prisoners, Halmar thought. Now I will find the princess and release her. He walked towards a narrow winged stairway that led up to the top of the tower. And a loud hissing noise came from somewhere behind him. The air became hot and smelled of strong sulfur. Ah, I've been expecting you, wheezed the low, hollow voice. Halmar turned quickly and saw that he was face to face with a terrible dragon. It was snorting with rage. Halmar drew his sword and rushed at the dragon. Down came the sword. There was a blinding flash, followed by a great puff of white smoke. When the smoke cleared away, the dragon was sitting down, purring purr like a kitten and smiling. I feel so much better now, thanks to you, the dragon said. Won't you have something to eat? Popcorn popped out of his nostrils and into a basket filled with butter. Yummy in my tummy, which was hung around his neck. Huge slices of chocolate cake and dishes of ice cream were stacked in shelves all along his back. Ice-cold lemonade poured out of his ears. Help yourself, said the dragon. It's all free. Halmar was tempted to stop and eat, but he thought of the little princess locked in the tower. I can't stop now, Halmar said. I have to rescue the princess. He ran up the winding stairway. At the top, he saw the fearsome black horseman, his spear raised high. Halmar bravely grabbed the spear with one hand and pulled the horseman to the ground. With a terrific crash, the black horseman broke into 1,000 little pieces on the stone floor. Halmar rushed past him into the tower room. The happy princess flung herself into his arms. We must get out of here at once, Halmar said. He seated the princess on his horse, leaped into the saddle, and dashed away. Out into the night flew the gallant charger. Over the treetops, over the rooftops of the houses they sailed. At last, I'm rescued, the princess said joyfully. Hold on tightly, cried Halmar over the shoulder. I will return you safely to your father, the king. Halmar reined up his horse as he saw the royal palace like a tiny speck far below. Down, down, down. They sailed until the horse finally came to a stop right outside the palace gates. The captain of the guard came out to meet them. Halt! Who goes there? He demanded curtly. When Halmar told him who he was and that he had rescued the king's daughter, all the soldiers threw their hats in the air and cheered, Yay! Then they formed a guard of honor and marched with Halmar and the princess into the palace and right up to the throne where the king sat. As soon as the king saw the princess, he rushed up to her and embraced her fondly, weeping with joy. He was so happy that he proclaimed a day of national rejoicing and ordered all the flags in the kingdom to be flown for a whole week. Yay! The king turned to Halmar. You shall be justly rewarded for your brave deed, he said, taking out his brightly jeweled sword. He tapped Halmar gently upon each shoulder and said, I dub thee knight. Arise, Sir Halmar. Then followed the royal celebration in Halmar's honor. The circus grounds were ablaze with color and lanterns, merry-go-rounds, circled bands played, everybody sang and danced to the stirring music. The princess danced with Hjalmar. On came the parade. There were clowns and performing elephants and jugglers and cowboys. Never was there such excitement. After Hjalmar rode back to the palace, between the king and the princess, in the golden coach. "They are yours to command," the king told Hjalmar. "Please bake me the largest cake you've ever baked with frosting 6 inches deep," Hjalmar said. And so Hjalmar feasted in the royal banquet hall. He sat next to the princess. He had such a wonderful time that he hoped it would never end. But it was getting late. Hjalmar's boat was waiting for him at the dock. He thanked the king and kissed the princess on the cheek. Then he started back. Along canals he sailed between houses that were fast asleep. Some of them were snorting heavily in great gusts of breaths. With each snore they blew the little boat along faster and faster until it left behind it a trail of white foam. Suddenly, the white foam turned into a soft, billowy clouds, and the bubbles became stars. Hjalmar was sailing through the sky as he drew near to one big star. He heard music coming from within. 3 little angels were singing out of hymn books. Hjalmar thought they were the sweetest voices he had ever heard. He looked over at the bright moon that hung like a huge yellow lantern in the sky. Someone was standing on a ladder, polishing its face. Hjalmar walked over toward to see who it could be. It was Ole Lukoie. "I didn't expect to see you here," said Hjalmar. "I'm always here at this time of night," replied Ole. "If I didn't keep the moon and the stars polished, nobody would ever see them at all. They get rusty so quickly out in this damp night air." "There must be millions of stars in the sky," Hjalmar said. "I wonder if you have time to finish them all before morning."
"It keeps me pretty busy," Ole agreed. "The stars aren't so bad. I can do them 2 hands at a time. But polishing this moon is hard work. Sometimes when I get a little behind, I don't have time to finish it all. That's why you often only see part of it shining."
Hjalmar stepped back to admire the brilliant shine Ole was putting on the moon's face. As he did so, his foot slipped off the edge of the cloud and he tumbled headlong into space. Down through layer upon layer of fleecy clouds he fell. He saw the top of his house coming up at him. He braced himself, then crash! Hjalmar sat up and he was right back in the middle of the picture frame. He looked into the room. Ole was already there. He was arguing with the portrait of Hjalmar's great-grandfather on the wall.
"Disgraceful, I call it,"
his great-grandfather was saying, wagging his finger angrily at Ole.
"You're old enough to know better than to take this little boy out of bed and keep him awake most of the night."
"And you're old enough to know that every little boy in the world loves to come with me on an adventure," Ole shot back. With that, he snatched up his umbrella and stalked out of the window. Hjalmar was so sleepy as he sat dangling his legs over the edge of the picture frame that he paid little attention to the argument. He yawned, then climbed out of the frame and slipped quietly back into bed. In 2 minutes, he was sound asleep. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.